All right. All right. Thank you everyone for coming. As you guys all voted to learn about Chunithm, so that's awesome. This game is really fun, and I hope you guys are interested in learning a little bit more. So today I put together a little presentation. I call it Chunithm 101, getting started and setting yourself up for success. First, just a little bit about me. As some of you might know, my name is Codex, or my nickname is Codex. I've been playing Chunithm since 2021, so for 4 years now, going on 5. My naive rating is 1743, and I'm currently number 14 on Kamaitachi. I'm the author of Chunithm.org, which is the kind of largest place of English resource Chunithm information, as well as a couple of other useful sources of information, such as the extended Chunithm tutorial, the chart compendium, and the Chunithm quest line. Some of the early parts of the presentation will be kind of similar to the extended Chunithm tutorial, but I'll also be building off of some of the concepts in there. So the kind of main walkthrough of this lesson, we're going to start with kind of first steps, getting started with the game. Then we're going to move into strategy and mental approach, moving on to practical advice, and then a bit of a Q&A session. So I believe there's some sticky notes around. If anyone wants to ask questions on a sticky note or just ask questions when we get to that point, feel free. And then the final part is a more kind of hands-on activity, which you're going to be able to practice kind of figuring out how to approach charts yourself. And then this presentation is geared mostly towards beginner to intermediate players. And as such, there's not going to be some of the more advanced concepts like overlapping notes, slide transfer, and announces. That's for potentially another presentation on another day. So getting started. The basics of Chunithm. So Chunithm is a vertically scrolling rhythm game. This is similar to many other rhythm games. Many mania style rhythm games where the notes kind of fall down from the top of the playfield to the bottom, and you hit the notes when they hit the judgment line. Chunithm's main gimmick is that the ground slider is a touch panel instead of being button-based, and it has these air sensors on the side that detect vertical motion. Another little small piece of nomenclature is that we call charts and not maps in this game. So that's the thing that the patterns are in, they're called charts. So I'll be referring to them as charts from now on. So there are 4 standard difficulties, which is basic, advanced, expert, and master. So each song will have at least 4 charts. And then some of them have an extra 5th difficulty, which is ultimate. Every chart's given a level between 1 and 15 plus. These are the things you can see kind of in the icon next to the difficulty name. And each one of them has a hidden chart constant, which is between 1 and 15.7. This is not displayed in game, but it is very integral to kind of the rating formula, which we'll be talking about later. Charts of different difficulties, but the same level. So for example, like a 12 expert versus a 12 master will not feel that different from each other because really it's the difficulty that determines like the chart. But there are some major distinctions between difficulties, such as basic advanced having no crosshand patterns. Experts will have crosshand patterns, almost all of them. And master and ultimate charts have flick notes and also feature heavy crosshand pattern use. So there are about 7 or 8 note types. First of all, there is the normal red tap. This is the most straightforward note. There's also EX tap, which is you can think of it as a very lenient tap note. You're guaranteed to get a justice critical judgment as long as you just hit anywhere within the judgment timing. There's hold notes, which are self-explanatory. Slide notes are hold notes, but with horizontal motion, so you have to trace them. There are air notes, which are these green arrows, and for those you raise your hand to trigger the note. There's air actions, which are waving your hands kind of in the air over the air sensor. And then finally, there are flick notes, which require you to move horizontally through the note. You cannot just tap them, and they only appear in masters and ultimate charts. So for scoring, Chunithm is a scoring game. Comboing does not really affect your final results. nor does clearing. Clearing is fake in this game. It is based off of the kind of this little step system, and it is really affected by what skill you choose, but that doesn't affect your final skill at all unless it kills you before you get to the end. There are 4 judgment types: Justice Critical, Justice Attack and Miss. Justice Critical is worth 101% score. Justice is worth 100% score. Attacks are worth 50, and misses are worth 0. So it is obviously very, very punishing to hit attacks and misses, and you want to minimize them as much as you can. The final score goes up to a maximum of 1,010,000, and that is considered an all Justice Critical. There are also clear lamps, which is full combo, and all Justice. Those generally don't really affect your gameplay when you're starting out, but they are useful for things later on, such as overpower. And then depending on what score you get, you're given a different rank. So triple S plus is 1,009,000 and above, triple S is 1,007,500 and above, etc. And then the main breakpoints are like double S, which is 1 million flat, and then S, which is 975. So rating is something that many players are aware of, and they're basically, it is calculated with a combination of your scores on a certain chart and the chart constant. So what happens is that in a version, so for example, for Chunithm verse and going forward, we're just gonna use this because it's simpler. It'll take your 30 top scores on all charts on before Chunithm verse, the version. So like all legacy charts will be combined, and the top 30 of them will be add to your rating. And then the most recent version will have 20 charts, and the 20 top scores from the current version will be averaged with those earlier 30 to make a best 50. So a best 50 is basically all your ratings averaged together, and that becomes your player rating, which is shown in your player card. So player ratings correspond to different thresholds, starting with green, going up to bronze, silver, gold, platinum, and rainbow as the kind of major breakpoints that a lot of players aim for when they're starting out. There are some additional cosmetics going past rainbow now in Chunithm verse. There's they add stars after you hit platinum, and then there's a kind of extreme rainbow at 17.0. And then so the last thing to kind of get started with is hand independence and cross hand. So when you're starting out, you want to kind of think about patterns in terms of left hand and right hand. So in all of these diagrams going forward, blue dots are going to be left hand inputs, and right dots are going to be right hand inputs. So at the expert level and above, patterns will ask you to move one hand over the other one to hit notes on the other side. So one of the ways that they like to signal this in charts is to use curved slides, like shown here and here, and also sometimes they use directional arrows as well to kind of guide your hands. Sometimes you might accidentally stumble across a chart that was charted very early, and it's very awkward, and you can kind of tell that they weren't really used to telegraphing properly. But in more modern charts, it's more straightforward. You can kind of trust the chart more. And when you're starting out your Chunithm journey, you should not change hands on the slide. You should follow through as much as you possibly can and allow yourself to kind of the pattern to resolve on its own. This way, you will kind of learn how the charts are intended to be hit. And then later on, you can start to kind of break the rules. Okay, so now that we've got the basics covered, we're going to cover kind of some of the more strategic approaches to the game. So the strategy and mentality. So rhythm game skill. How do we define rhythm game skill? It can be defined in many aspects. So rating is a very general benchmark of skill. So rating going up is a reflection of skill increase. So most players will chase the rating, right? They'll want the rating number to go up and up and up. How do we increase skill in rhythm games? Does anyone have an answer?
Play more.
Play more? Play more? Okay, yes! Play more! Yeah! Of course, just play the game more, right? This is very common advice in rhythm games. You must eventually, when it comes down to it, you have to practice the game in order to get better at it, right? That's obvious. But also it's quite vague, right? What kinds of levels or difficulties should a player play? What kind of charts should a player play? Do they play the same small pool of charts, or should they play different ones? Should they focus on higher difficulty charts? When should they focus on lower difficulty charts? Should they ever focus on lower difficulty charts, right? So these are all questions that are just not addressed by Playmore, right? So when it comes to skill in rhythm games, let's break it down into two major aspects, which is reading and perception and execution. So reading is the skill of kind of, seeing the pattern and then trying to understand how to approach it. It's basically coming up with a plan to hit the notes. And this kind of is related to kind of getting overwhelmed and when there's too much on screen is part of the reading skill being overwhelmed. The other half is execution. So execution is, okay, you have the idea of how you're supposed to hit it, but can your fingers or arms or muscles actually do it, right? So this is when you run into kind of more physical limitations, such as you just don't have enough physical strength or stamina to kind of go through the. So with that in mind, I'm going to introduce the concept of pull, run, push. So pull, run, push is a framework that helps you kind of figure out what the optimal difficulty range is to play for Chunithm, and also helps you develop multiple aspects of skill. So how it works is that you take your current rating, whatever it is, you deduct 2. So that would be your run difficulty level. So for example, if we have a player rated that's rated 14.5, we would deduct 2 from that, that'd be 12.5. So they should focus on their run level being around 12 to 12.5, right? So I have it here in the run. So for any given session, a player should spend the majority of their time around that level. And the idea is that they should be kind of getting scores that are around the SS plus the SSS. They should also take time to pull, which is to play charts underneath their run level. So that's like playing lowers, as otherwise known. And also to push, which is play charts above the run level. So this is basically everything in moderation, right? You want to focus mostly on running, but you also do practice pulling and pushing. So why do we do that? Basically, they all kind of address different parts of this reading and execution push dichotomy here. So pulling will not really help your reading skill because it's not kind of challenging you in terms of reading, because the patterns should be kind of obvious how you're going to hit them, and they should be very readable. But it is very good practice for your execution because you are increasing your timing and your nerves on easier patterns. When you are running on your run level, it is kind of all across the board, improving both your reading and your execution. And when you're pushing, it's obviously helping you read more and read better because it is kind of challenging you a little bit on the density. But for execution, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Obviously, you do need to kind of push yourself out of your comfort zone to start getting faster. But generally speaking, your level of ability suffers because you're not able to kind of keep up with charts at your push level, and a little bit of that is okay. Essentially, the goal is to make sure that you build a solid fundamental set of skills which will help your growth later down the line. So this is kind of a visual representation of the idea of why is having good fundamentals important. And so as you can see, the more solid your base is, the more resilient you are to hard patterns. And obviously there are other ways that you can also improve part of your skills outside of the game as well, such as reading charts that are just outside of the game, just doing chart study, which is obviously improves your visual skill. So with that in mind, also you want to avoid mashing. It is very easy to kind of get faced with a pattern that you kind of have no clue how to do, and you just kind of rub your hands all across the slider, and you'll generally get some points out of it, but it's important to not do this or make this a habit. What is better is that if you come back to the chart later, when you're a better player, you'll be better able to face the pattern, and you can better understand and reflect from the mistakes you already make. And therefore, you also avoid mind blocking yourself on certain harder charts. So the reason why I kind of recommend taking your rating -2 is because of the way that the rating formula works. So essentially, the rating formula is not linear across the entire score range and spikes up around the SS to SSS range. As you can see here in this graph, it's linear up to right here, which is SS, and then it kind of, the rate of rating increase spikes up right around here. So it is more efficient if you are trying to push your rating to aim for high score on lower constant charts rather than pushing for low score on high constant charts. This will also be much more helpful for preventing you from building bad habits. It's also important to try and really develop the mentality of trying to minimize as many mistakes early on as possible. So essentially an S rank, which is quite good to start out, obviously, corresponds to about 3.5 margin of error from the total score. So 975 over 1,010,000, right? This looks okay on paper, like 3.5 is low, but a lot of score in Chunithm is highly protected. So really, you can kind of not think very hard and get an 800,000 without too much trouble because a lot of score is tied up in EX taps or holes or slides or airs, and those are all free points basically, right? So if we look at the constant, the rating table again, and here it's like a bar it's zoomed in, like this is the total score in a chart. And like the thresholds that actually give you rating are all the way at the end over there, right? So basically SS and up, for every chart, you can gain an additional up to plus 2.15 from the chart constant. So like 0.5 of that, which is a whole quarter of the additional score you can get, is locked up in double S and above, which is 0.5% margin of error of the total score, right? So that's like 25% of your potential additional rating. So that's why it's important to really push for higher thresholds and go for higher accuracy as you play. Okay, now we're going to move on to kind of a little more practical advice. So that's enough about strategy. So one of the most common sources of mistakes in Chunithm comes from form. Because the ground slider is a touch device, it is really easy to kind of unintentionally trigger inputs, and this is called splashing when you don't want to. Just like your finger was in the wrong place, or maybe your hand came down at a weird angle and then you accidentally hit something you didn't. Basically, the way you kind of want to minimize this is by being as deliberate as possible with your movements. And for wider notes, you want to try and tap them with individual fingers. So this minimizes kind of the total area you're hitting of the slider at any time. So basically, here is a couple of notes on basically what the default stance should be. So for air notes, you kind of just, all you need to do is raise your wrist kind of straight up in the air, like like maybe 10 centimeters. You don't need to move your entire arm up. You just need to raise your wrist a little bit. I've seen people like completely overshoot the air slider. Like you don't need to use that much force. It's fine. It's very forgiving. Once you find the range, you can see that players that are very used to it are actually it looks like they're almost not triggering the air sensor, but it still triggers because they've minimized their form a lot. When you're putting your hands towards the slider, you should have a natural curve in your fingers. So your wrist should hover slightly over it, and you should kind of have this kind of 45-degree angle of attack between your fingertip and the slider itself. You want to stand a little bit behind the cabinet. Like you shouldn't be right up against it because you risk blocking the air sensors with the side of your arms. And basically, each muscle group is doing something a little bit different. Your arms during play are mostly raising your hands and doing macro level positioning. Your wrists are mostly there also to kind of make sure you're in the right horizontal position for patterns, and also sometimes to assist in rotating. But really, your fingers should be what is tapping and executing on most of the patterns in the game. Because your fingers have the most dexterity, they have the highest degree of control, therefore we want to be really developing our finger dexterity as much as we can. So in terms of like fingering layouts, most of Chunithm, a lot of basic Chunithm patterns when you're reaching like advanced experts, even like basic patterns and masters that generally follow a 4K layout. So that'll be like 4 quarters of the playfield. And so it is common to adopt some of these different fingering styles. So 4-2-2-4 just refers to basically ring and index finger on both hands. This is kind of a very common, like comfortable layout for people. Also 5-2-2-5 is common, 4-1-1-4 I've seen as well, or some players have an asymmetrical pattern. There is no one correct finger layout because it does eventually all fall to player preference. But this is not exhaustive. essentially, it's good to also kind of end up being flexible with what finger is hitting what note, because patterns in Chunithm kind of are all over the place, and you're going to have to push yourself out of the 4K, like static 4K layout a lot of the time. We generally don't see two fingers next to each other in like the default 4K layout because the positioning of notes gets kind of far apart. So it's not really recommended to use 3-2-2-3 or like 4-3-3-4. Who the heck uses that? And then just some other really important, helpful mechanics to know about when you're starting out. One of them is key beats. So these are these like flashing columns that you see on the playfield on the bottom that kind of like light up when you hit the slider. These actually mean something. They reflect what the current judgment of whatever you just hit is. So it indicates the current active column. If it is yellow, that means you hit whatever the note was with just as critical accuracy. If it's orange, you hit it with justice. If it's green, it's an attack. And if it's like you missed it, you missed it. It flashes white for anything that's not a current active note. So that is something that is really helpful for you to kind of pay attention to if you're trying to hit patterns that are kind of moving or you aren't entirely sure where your hands are. Another notable game mechanic is thin slides. This is like a common pain point for a lot of players when they're starting out. The reason why slides are kind of finicky is because they actually check for input triggers across of the columns. So Chunithm's touch slider isn't like continuous. It is 16 columns and 2 rows. So when a slide crosses a column, it's checking for a new input. So if you're kind of using your entire palm down on the slide and you're kind of just hoping that it will stay triggered, it won't. So what you need to do to like hit them is to either kind of rub up and down or to draw circles on them if you're unsure about how well you can trace them. Obviously, best case scenario is just tracing the slides as best as you can, but in the case of just some of these patterns, this is kind of hard, right? There's a lot of really thin moving slides here or here, and so if you're not careful, it's very easy to drop them. And another thing is to know that the slider, because it is broken up into top and bottom halves that are independently like sensing, you can take advantage of that for patterns that kind of get really cramped and uncomfortable and split some of your inputs into the top and bottom to hit them consistently. All right, so that covers basically all the basics that I could think about. Are there any questions?